Ladies and gentlemen, we're witnessing history in the making. Hit subscribe right this second to this channel. Rolling Stone Representative Byron Donalds wants Supreme Court to step in and overturn Trump conviction. It's all over the news now. You have Congressman Byron Donalds. You have a number of people very close to future President Trump's campaign asking the Supreme Court to overturn an absurd, unconstitutional guilty verdict. 100%. They've essentially overturned, and they will overturn this absurd guilty verdict. A state cannot level a federal crime at a citizen without the FEC or IRS or federal government or Department of Justice involved. The Department of Justice and FEC dropped the case. This is huge, ladies and gentlemen. Ever since I was talking about this the day after the verdict, or the day of the verdict, I said the Supreme Court's going to get involved. Now you see everyone stating within liberal publications like the Rolling Stone, oh yeah, you know what? The Supreme Court might nullify Vox. Will the Supreme Court overturn the Trump conviction? 100%. They will overturn the conviction, just like I told you. They will overturn the Colorado Supreme Court, the absurd Colorado Supreme Court ban of Trump. 9-0. You'll even get liberal justices, I think, to overturn the guilty verdict in Colorado. I think they've already decided. They've essentially already blocked any prison sentence. Well, the prison sentence will be overturned. The conviction will be overturned. There is a 2% chance he actually steps foot in prison. There's a 100% chance that they've already decided they're going to overturn this unconstitutional guilty verdict. The precedent is the Supreme Court overturning the Colorado ban. Check this out.
The Supreme Court has ruled on the Trump ballot case, and they've ruled in Trump's favor. Molly Hemingway with us now. I know this is right. You're just coming right at us, Molly, but I want you to give us some significance of this, where it's going. Is Trump winning on this? Is Biden losing on this? Go.
Yeah, this was an issue where as soon as oral arguments were held, people expected the Supreme Court to say that Colorado's attempt to remove President Trump from the ballot would not be allowed. And I'm very curious to find out what the actual ruling is. Some people thought it would be 7-2 or maybe even unanimous. The questioning from the justices during oral argument was very critical of Democrats' attempts.
Molly, can I interrupt for just 1 second? I'm very sorry. It was a unanimous 9-0 decision.
Well, that really says a lot about this attempt to remove from the ballot the Republican nominee and keep from millions, tens of millions of Americans, the right to vote for whomever they want. There has been a lot of lawfare happening in this country against the Republican nominee, and it's not working very well. You just said it in your opening take with these polls showing that people are not supporting President Biden. And this is as lawfare is being engaged in across the country in Democrat areas such as Colorado, where they tried to say that Coloradoans would not have the right to vote for whom they want to if that person is Donald Trump. So it just really is a real big setback for Democrats in this effort that they have, and should be a reminder that using the courts for political gain is not a great approach.
Back to my editorial, as you noted there, I looked at the New York Times polling and the Fox polling, and it's very grim for the president. And I agreed with the Wall Street Journal that it's panic time at the White House. How serious is this? I mean, are they on the verge of saying, hey, no mas?
Well, the problem for Democrats, it is true that people do find President Biden to be very old, but the big problem is they wouldn't care about it if they liked how the country was being run. Nobody really thinks President Biden is running things anyway. So if they liked the policies, they would be willing to have him continue as a figurehead. The problem for Democrats is that it's a difficult difficult problem to overcome, because even if they replace him with someone else, it's not like Gavin Newsom is going to have better policies when it comes to the border or crime or the economy. If anything, they might even be worse. And so it is those policies where people say they do not feel their lives are better than they were under the previous administration. And that's kind of politics 101. You know, was your life better now than it was 4 years ago? And people are saying they have a chance to compare the previous presidency with the current one, and they're finding the previous one to be much more attractive.
What's Kamala Harris doing, calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza?
Well, they do have a
So you have, ladies and gentlemen, a huge Colorado victory. This is a precursor. This is the precedent. When I tell you the guilty verdict has already been reversed or overturned, essentially it already has. I told you there would be a unanimous decision. There was a unanimous decision to overturn the absurd Colorado ban. The precedent to overturn Trump's conviction, because he was convicted for a federal crime that's imaginary. It doesn't exist. They haven't given the legal statute yet. They don't even know which FEC statute he broke. They made up a crime. The FEC, the Federal Election Commission, did not find Trump guilty of anything. The state of New York, the state of Colorado, they don't have the jurisdiction to level a crime, a felony against Trump, when the federal government didn't even level a felony. A state can only level a federal crime, the state can only utilize a federal statute that a person broke when the federal government and Department of Justice are involved. They can't unilaterally decide based on their own state's viewpoint that Trump broke a Federal Election Commission law. It's not even possible. So it's blatantly unconstitutional. I think you're going to get probably a unanimous, at least 7-2. You'll get at least one liberal justice overturning a very absurd, unconstitutional guilty verdict in New York. But let's listen to all the other reasons on appeal, and I'll still claim victory if it's overturned on appeal before the Supreme Court, because that would be an unmitigated disaster for Democrats. Either way, it'll be a disaster, but I want it overturned no matter what, whether it's state appeal or Supreme Court, and that is going to happen on the Supreme Court.
So we'd like your take on this. There are fights already breaking out in the House as judiciary.
This is a former Manhattan DA. Former congressional lawyer.
Is teeing up its hearing July 12th with Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg. Now, lawmakers are hammering his prosecution of former Trump as unconstitutional on First and Sixth Amendment violations. What do you think? Could Trump use this maybe in his appeal this hearing?
The Sixth Amendment, they don't know. The judge in the court did not tell Trump exactly what he did. We don't even know the federal crime. We don't know the federal statute. We don't know the federal crime yet, if you could believe that. Okay, they said FEC and IRS criminal activity. We don't know exactly what Trump is accused of, the IRS or FEC statutes. They literally did not give a statute. So it's already been overturned by the Supreme Court based on precedent. It's just a matter, I cannot tell you. 100% I can tell you it'll be overturned. I cannot tell you when, though. And then the First Amendment, the gag order.
Hearing or what?
Well, I think this conviction will be reversed on appeal. I think it was a horrible prosecution, an abusive prosecution. One of the main things, Liz, that the American Revolution got rid of was the Star Chamber, which is what the British Crown used to prosecute its adversaries. They stripped defendants of all rights. It was essentially what the monarchy used to basically persecute people they didn't like. This was a Star Chamber. That prosecuted Donald Trump. He was never properly informed of the charges. NDAs are neither illegal nor are they reportable under the federal campaign laws. The jury was not required to have a unanimous verdict. Instead, they could pick from a Chinese menu of possible violations.
For the underlying charge to support the felony.
The bookkeeping attempt had to be attached to some other offense that he was never informed which offense that was in order to take a offense that had expired under the statute of limitations, the bookkeeping offense, and transmogrify it into a felony. It was a completely abusive prosecution. You know, when I was chief counsel Liz, of the Judiciary Committee during the Clinton impeachment, the primary argument the Democrats made was this was a selective prosecution, and the case Ken Starr tried to make against Bill Clinton would have never been brought against anyone else given the circumstances, given the legal and factual circumstances. This is exactly the case that happened in Trump. There has never been a jury that has tried a defendant for a federal election campaign violation because of a non-disclosure agreement or because of hush money. There has never been a case like this where a deeply conflicted district attorney who campaigned on going after Trump. This is Joe Stalin. Show me the man, I'll show you the crime. He campaigned against going after Trump, and then he brought a case. The statute of limitations had expired. He brought a case on a completely unprecedented, mangling or attempt to put together these sort of disconnected legal theories that have never been tried before. This case will almost certainly be reversed on appeal.
The question is when the appeal will take place on a state level. And the other issue is the following. When they say, well, this happens all the time, you'll hear this on CNN, well, it happens all the time. I mean, judges use people like Michael Cohen, and the issue is it's not even an FEC crime. You'll hear from Bradley Smith, like you always do, and Hans A. von Spakovsky, and you'll hear from Trey Traynor, 3 former FEC chairmen. Even if Trump paid from his own pocketbook, Stormy, it would not have been an FEC crime. That's why the state of New York did not level a specific statute against Trump. That's why they got Michael Cohen to admit guilt with an FEC statute where he didn't even commit a crime. It would be the equivalent of a person who didn't rob a bank pleading guilty to robbing a bank. He wasn't there. So why plead guilty? Well, he pled guilty so he could then say, Trump did the same thing, when in reality, that wasn't even a crime.
And what I'm offended by, Liz, is that more Democrats are not standing up for what's right, which was this is an abusive prosecution. And they're not standing up for what's right because they don't like Donald Trump. And that's wrong. That's where our democracy starts to fall apart.
Yeah, that's when it gets twisted. So let's get your reaction to the fighting between Congressman Matt Gaetz and Jerry Nadler. And also watch Congressman Thomas Massie ask, why aren't Congress's $17 million in hush money payments also campaign finance violations? Take a listen to this.
It's a little absurd because Mr. Bragg and Mr. Colangelo have already agreed to appear before the committee on July 12th.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, this debate's out of order.
You made a motion. It's not out of order.
No, you have to seek recognition. I've made a motion to subpoena these people now, pursuant to the rules, and I want to vote on my motion, or I want someone to move to table it.
Congress has paid over $17 million in hush money for sexual misconduct inside of the offices in these buildings. And what's more is that was taxpayer money, right? The allegation is that President Trump paid $130,000 of his own money. Who in here has had the taxpayer pay for their sexual misconduct charges, the hush money? I bet there's some over there. There may be some over here. I don't know, but I do know it's taxpayer money, and I do know not a single penny of it has been turned in as a campaign finance expense. Is the FEC going to investigate the $17 million that Congress has paid to settle, behind closed doors these sexual misconduct allegations? So the irony here is this is going to be vacated. And this trial was all about trying to influence an election.
Julian, your reaction. We should point out it wasn't just for sexual misconduct allegations. It was also for workplace discrimination.
The hypocrisy is unbelievable. The hypocrisy of Democrats, the hypocrisy of Congress to just sit by and, the never-Trumpers also in the Republican Party. So you have taxpayer money going to hush money. With Trump, he didn't even use his own money. He could have. He didn't use campaign money. Michael Cohen paid from his own money. wouldn't have affected even one person to go from Clinton to Trump in 2016. They always say, when they look at 4 years ago, they say, well, there was certain, it was sloppy, but, any criminal behavior wouldn't have influenced the ultimate result, which was mashed potato brains winning and sending the country into turmoil and madness. It was completely above board. Not one person would have altered their vote from Clinton to Trump if they found out that Trump had an affair with Stormy, which is almost certainly true, but it's irrelevant. Nobody would have cared. He still would have won. And it's not even a Federal Election Commission violation. The FEC fined Clinton and the DNC for purchasing the Steele dossier with campaign money, a compilation of lies and information that misinforms, all the things that Democrats hyperventilate about, from a foreign intel agent, by the way. I mean, the epitome of hypocrisy is today's Democratic Party.
And your reaction to what you just heard?
Well, there were two issues there. I think what Gaetz is trying to do is an insurance package, an insurance guarantee that Colangelo and Bragg actually show up on July 12th. What Jim Jordan's position is that's not necessary because they've agreed to do it. Jordan is probably correct on that. As soon as you introduce a subpoena, the local DA can clam up and go into litigation. Once you have an agreement, it's probably the best and most efficient way to ensure that they get there. So they've got good attorneys on the Judiciary Committee, Democrat and Republican, and Gaetz would be well advised to take their lead.
So everyone knows that this is going to be overturned. It's a done deal. Game, set, match. A state cannot level a federal crime at anyone without the federal government involved. You can't make up an FEC statute or a federal statute and say, oh, you broke this, and therefore you're committing a felony, and that elevates a misdemeanor, and there you go, you're going to prison. Can't do that. Not possible. But this was a couple hours ago. Congressman Byron Donalds wants Supreme Court to step in. This is going to become a daily thing that you're going to see. And I was at the forefront of this, telling everyone it's already overturned. You don't have to worry about Trump. I mean, there's a chance that he goes to jail, like a 4%, 5% chance, but that would only expedite the Supreme Court overturning it. When it gets to the Supreme Court, done deal, 100% overturned. I just don't know when. That's the issue. It's not legally valid, as the Missouri AG says right here.
DA says he will not appear on Capitol Hill today as House Republicans hold a hearing on former President Trump's New York trial. Bragg citing scheduling conflicts. He is set to testify, though, on July 12th, just one day after Trump's sentencing. Federal Election Commissioner Trey Traynor and Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey set to testify today at today's hearing, and they join me now. Trey, you notice I emphasized the election in your title. I guess we're finally set to hear from somebody who actually understands how election law works. Juan Merchan cannot silence you. What are the top points, Trey, you're going to try and drive home today?
Well, the most important point is that Judge Merchan completely obliterated what's been longstanding federal election law with the jury charge that he gave, asking the jury whether Donald Trump had willfully contributed to a campaign. And the legal standard has long been knowing and willful standard. So he's completely upended that standard. And
it was not an FEC violation. This is Trey Traynor, a former Federal Election Commission commissioner, chairman, and this is the third chairman that said it's not a federal crime. The FEC dropped the hush money case. This is so blatantly unconstitutional. A state run by Democrats making up a federal crime to elevate misdemeanors. Only today's Democratic Party would do that, to imprison their direct political rivals.
one of those things where the Department of Justice should have intervened early in this case and protected the jurisdiction of the federal government to enforce federal campaign finance law. They didn't. They didn't protect the jurisdiction of the Federal Election Commission, and it's completely perplexing why they didn't do that. There's long-standing Supreme Court precedent that says that they should have.
And it's just how law works. People always fight over jurisdiction. They never give that up. And in this case, it was ceded so easily. Andrew, Democrats, of course, are going to try and flip the script, calling today's hearing playing politics. And they're going to make this point, Andrew, A.G. Bailey. They merely follow the facts and the law up there in New York City. How will you cut the legs out from under that argument?
Well, they bent the law to meet the facts in a specious legal charge. There's an unseemly amount of prosecutorial misconduct. And at the end of the day, what that does is it injects both statutory and constitutional violations into the process from the charging document onto the jury deliberations. And so this is a legally errant conviction. It's not a legally valid conviction. And that emphasizes the illicit nature of the witch hunt prosecution. And it's important that the American people understand that the goal here was never to convict President Trump of a crime. It was always to remove him from the campaign trail. Now, this is a presidential candidate that has a right to speak and that we as a people have a right to access. This has done immeasurable damage.
So his First and Sixth Amendment rights were violated. So not only the separation of state and federal jurisdiction to level criminal statutes, his First Amendment rights with the absurd gag order, Michael Cohen, Stormy, everyone could insult him. He couldn't respond, even though he's running for president. And the Sixth Amendment, we still don't know the federal crime. They say FEC crimes. The FEC dropped the case. They made it up. We don't know the statute. When they fined Clinton and the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, for purchasing the Steele dossier, you could actually see the specific statute. Okay, but we don't know the specific FEC statutes with Trump. That's unconstitutional. It's so obvious, and it's so blatant, and I'm just focusing on this like a laser beam.
To our democratic republic, and we've got to hold wrongdoers accountable.
Let's focus on this Matthew Colangelo, Alvin Bragg dichotomy here at A.G. Bailey, because the number 3 starter right now in the Yankees rotation is not waving his hand and saying, please send me to single A so I can ply my craft. What possible reason could Matthew Colangelo, the number 3 at the Department of Justice, have to leave the DOJ, go down to the Manhattan DA, if not for his desire to help the Democrats and get Trump?
Yeah, the DOJ may not have intervened to reassert the jurisdiction of the FEC. That's the appropriate legal avenue for the DOJ. But instead, what they did was deploy resources to the state of New York in the form of Matthew Colangelo, like you said, the former third-ranking official in Biden's Department of Justice, who led the trial court prosecution against President Trump on behalf of Alvin Bragg. So he takes a pay cut to go work in state court. He's politically motivated. Those prosecutors should have been disqualified from prosecuting that case. There was no case to begin with. A subsequent prosecutor that the court could have appointed would have identified that and dismissed it before it got this far. And again, Biden is behind this whole thing. I mean, he has managed the Department of Justice that also administers grants on behalf of the Soros-backed Vera Institute to Alvin Bragg's office with the intent of dismantling the criminal justice system. So while Alvin Bragg is ignoring crime in the subways and on the city streets, he is being trained to weaponize the criminal justice system against Biden's political opponents.
Trey, quick final word to you. If we don't stop this lawfare right now in its tracks, can our century-old justice system survive?
No, it can't. And we have a big threat to the First Amendment and whether or not candidates can actually run for office in any state, because we'll have turned loose all the prosecutors across the country, whether they be state or local prosecutors, to go after individual candidates for perceived violations of campaign finance law.
Perceived violations, Trey Traynor is 100% correct. And I think that, you know what? There's a wonderful James Brown Godfather of Soul song called The Big Payback. Okay, The Big Payback from James Brown. And that's what Trump has to play every single day. That should be in his inauguration, the only song people hear. The Big Payback by James Brown. If you want to behave, and you want to accuse Trump of things he didn't do, then it's only fair for Trump to look at if top Democrats committed crimes. And then you get this apoplectic, hysterical response from the wonderful, morally superior, highly educated among us. He wants retribution. You wanted retribution from day one for Trump defeating Clinton in 2016. You wanted retribution. You wanted revenge. You accused him of things he didn't do. You literally purchased a compilation of lies and gossip and deceit and information that misinforms, called the Steele dossier, that, by the way, was a campaign finance violation. We are going to hear now from Bradley Smith why this is not a campaign finance violation and why it's blatantly unconstitutional. Any moment now. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, this is essentially already taken place. While the video is stalled, this is essentially already taken place. Let's go ahead real quick. You know what? Hold on one sec. So in a couple of seconds, you will hear Bradley Smith talk about it, but essentially what's taken place is the following. The FEC the FEC dropped the case. Okay, here we go. Oh my Lord. So the FEC dropped the case, and hold on one sec. The FEC dropped the case, the hush money case. The FEC was given the hush money case by, the FEC looked and investigated the hush money case. And so,
but no, it's a good example of things that influence the campaign. And it's worth noting that under the FEC's regulations, if you're an incumbent office holder, you're presumed to be running for re-election. So you're all presumed to be candidates unless they've announced that they're not seeking re-election. So they would be candidates, and this is something that they probably did to influence their future campaign or their perception as office holders. And one thing that's worth adding here, Mark, is because I hear this from people all the time, and even some other election people who know election law, lawyers and some former other commissioners will say, yes, but it was to influence an election. But the FEC in its regulations very specifically rejected the idea that even as to whether it was primarily to influence the election or not, and choosing instead this test that it has to be an obligation that was created for the election. In other words, they didn't want to get into the question of trying to guess, well, did they do this primarily for the election or primarily for personal purposes? And it's very specific about that in the regulations. And I think that's a very important point that people need to keep in mind. And that was done actually to make it more objective and actually to prevent candidates from using their campaign funds for personal use. But, that's the flip side. And I tell people, imagine if you're a lawyer for the Trump campaign and you want to do it all right. You've got one provision of the statute says I have to pay it with the campaign funds. Another provision seems to say I can't pay with campaign funds. Somebody's going to get them coming or going, and that's part of the problem.
So if you're a lawyer for the Trump campaign or the coming Trump campaign, you would do pretty much what Donald Trump did. No campaign money, consult your private lawyer, and they enter into these non-disclosure agreements. Greg, let me ask you this. Isn't the real issue here is people were actually paid under the non-disclosure agreements and then they violated the non-disclosure agreements? I don't see them giving the money back.
Oh, you're absolutely right.
I think it's malpractice for the attorney for Stormy Daniels to say, go ahead and talk while the case is pending as to whether or not it's a valid and enforceable non-disclosure agreement. So it's stunning to me. But to Bradley's point, not everything that benefits a candidate is considered to be a campaign expense. Professor Smith wrote that in one of his op-eds, and he's absolutely right. If there is a dual purpose or a secondary purpose, it's not a campaign expense. And moreover, the media rushed and said, oh, Cohen pled guilty, the president must be guilty. That's utter nonsense. First of all, under the Federal Campaign Election Act and other related laws that criminalize violations, there has to be knowledge. You have to show that there was a knowing and deliberate violation of the law in order for it to be criminal. Well, most candidates don't know the election law. Heck, a lot of lawyers don't understand election laws. This gentleman, former commissioner, the Federal Election Commission, chairman, I mean, he knows election law. He may be just about the only one in America who really truly knows it. So you couldn't criminalize what Trump did if it wasn't properly accounted for as an advance or reimbursement. Okay, that's a civil penalty.
Randy, thank you so much. Shabbat shalom as well. Shalom as well. Thank you, Randy. Stormy was paid $100,000. We don't even have any proof or evidence that Trump paid Michael Cohen in 11 installments, and those 11 installments had to do with the Stormy Daniels payment. Could have just been him on a retainer or whatever, payment for other services. He was a lawyer for Trump. Okay, we have no clue. There's no evidence that Michael Cohen ever gave to the court about reimbursement. No email, no recording, and then they get a recording. It's like, well, in 2018, Michael Cohen testified he has no evidence, no tape, no nothing that says Trump paid him money for reimbursing, but it wouldn't even have mattered. Democrats are brilliant at getting lost in the weeds. Minutia, stuff that doesn't even matter to the legality of what took place. It's irrelevant. And so at the end of the day, Trump could have paid with his own pocketbook. It wouldn't have made a difference.
It's the equivalent of a jaywalking $500 fine, but it's certainly not a crime.
I did a search. It didn't take me long. Of all the federal candidates who've been charged and been convicted of violating these laws, I can't find a single one. Are you aware of a single one?
For this kind of scenario?
This kind of scenario?
No, I'm really not. Of course, the most high-profile one would be John Edwards from a few years ago.
And what happened in
Folks may remember that supporters were paying money to a woman, Riley Hunter, I believe was her name, with whom he'd had an affair and an illegitimate child. And now it's worth noting, the U.S. attorney indicted him, so they went to trial on it. So the U.S. attorney thought there was a case, but in the end, the jury did not convict. He was acquitted on some charges, and others was a hung jury. And I think that shows the tremendous difficulty. And one quick little anecdote when we talk about how obscure this law is, how difficult, is Antonin Scalia, who was a reasonably good lawyer, right, actually said from the bench in the Supreme Court argument once that this campaign finance law is so complex, I can't figure it out. So if we've got a Supreme Court justice can't figure it out, you see the problems that people have when they're trying to deal with it on a daily basis.
And the reason I'm bringing this up now, weeks and weeks.
The statute within the FEC, they can't give the statute. The state of New York obviously cannot give the statute because it's not a crime. That's why they're withholding. The Sixth Amendment violation is we don't know what he's being charged with. And then there's a boundless definition that the Supreme Court ruled against in 2016, the Bob McDonnell conviction. They overturned unanimously a boundless definition of crimes. You can't, and there's a vagueness doctrine or vagueness clause that the Supreme Court has ruled against also. You can't just simply say Trump did something to break federal law, leave it at that. You have to get the federal government involved and say, here's what he did. And that will elevate the state misdemeanors, but they know he didn't break the law. And that's why they're not telling anyone what the crime is. This is Hans A. von Spakovsky telling the world there is no crime. He's a former Federal Election Commission chairman.
I have the same reaction Francis Hakes does. This is a travesty, a miscarriage of justice. This was a phony prosecution from the very beginning. And for this jury, think about how many weeks this trial went on, how many witnesses came in, and in the very short time that the jury was out, they decided he was guilty on all 34 charges. This is a damage to the reputation of the American justice system like we have never seen. I have a colleague just got back from a conference overseas, and the reaction of lawyers and people there was that the United States has now gotten to be like the countries they are from, where the government uses its law enforcement powers to go after its political opponents. And that, I think, is exactly what happened here.
Hans, what was the underlying federal campaign violation? Did we ever find that out?
We never found that out. It's the epitome of what an unconstitutional guilty verdict would be.
Well, there was nothing in the original indictment about any kind of federal campaign violation. They kept saying that the legal expenses, which is what were listed in the business records, should have been a campaign-related expense, the payment that was made to Stormy Daniels. But as Brad Smith, I know, would have testified, under the test applied by the FEC, this was not a campaign-related expense, period. There's just no question about that. So for this jury to say that, oh yeah, he violated federal campaign finance laws and that justifies the underlying verdict, that is such an egregious mistake that at the Court of Appeals in New York, when they get this case, they ought to reverse this almost immediately because of this and so many other mistakes made in the case.
How many do you count? How many mistakes?
I lost count of how many errors were made by this judge and by the prosecution. I mean, the judge let in all kinds of irrelevant evidence that had no bearing on the charges against the president, but were obviously there to blacken the character of Donald Trump. The judge shouldn't have even been on the case. He should have recused himself because of his personal family dealings, his daughter's involvement, his making political contributions in violation of the ethics rules in New York. There are just so many mistakes and errors he made that I don't see how a Court of Appeals could not overturn this verdict.
This is the latest article a couple hours ago. Ladies and gentlemen, Representative Byron Donalds wants the Supreme Court to step in. The Supreme Court essentially has overturned the conviction. It's not a constitutional decision. It's unconstitutional. Now it's 100% been overturned because the justices have already looked at the case. Each one of them has said, well, when it gets to us, how am I going to decide on this? You already have 6 laughing at the state of New York. And there might even be a unanimous decision, because it was a unanimous decision to overturn the Bob McDonnell 2016 decision. And that, ladies and gentlemen, we might get this week, tomorrow, this next couple of weeks, the immunity victory. He'll get a huge presidential immunity victory, okay, and overturning of the guilty verdict. So this is it'll be the third huge victory after the Colorado ban being overturned for Trump. This is the great Alan Dershowitz.
We should not respect the legal system that is rigged. In my book, Get Trump, I predicted months before this case ever came to trial that it was a foregone conclusion there'd be a conviction. A biased judge, a biased jury, a biased prosecutor, a man who ran for office on the theory of let's find the crime to prosecute Trump for. And they couldn't find the crime, so they made it up.
Mad Cow Mark, thank you so very much. Paul, everyone here, to my viewers in Australia, thank you so much. Greatly, greatly appreciated. Mad Cow Mark, thank you. Randy, thank you again. To the Super Chat, thank you. To the members, thank you. Everywhere around the world, if you watch, definitely tell your friends, hit subscribe. Word of mouth is so important, especially if you live in Australia or the Philippines or New Zealand or the UK, Canada, anywhere around the world where you watch this channel. I really appreciate you because the YouTube algorithm actually really rewards content creators for people who watch throughout the world. So I'm really, really thankful, especially, obviously, also for people in the U.S., my country as well. If you're new, hit subscribe, tell your friends. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you again, Mark. Thank you.
We're now a day after the verdict. I've known criminal law. I've been involved in criminal law 60 years. I still don't know what the crime is.
Right.
Was he found guilty of intending to violate tax laws, to violate the federal election laws, to defraud the voters? I still don't know, and we're a day after this. This is the most outrageous case. You know, everybody knows the quote from Lavrentiy Beria, the head of the KGB, and Stalin, when Beria said to Stalin,
show me the man and I'll show you the crime.
No, find you the crime.
Find you the crime, yeah.
Tried to find the crime, and he couldn't. So he made up the crime. He took it a step further than Stalin and Lavrentiy Beria. This case will go down in history as one of the most abusive.
Paul, thank you so very much. Andrea, thank you. Thank you so much. Paul Bartlett, thank you. To my viewers in Australia and around the world, thank you, everybody.
Abusive prosecutions since the trial of Aaron Burr back in 18 whatever it was. This is a stain on our criminal justice
really is.
system.
And by the way, you're not the only liberal Democrat saying that. We had this interesting piece that was in the New York Magazine, of all places, by a CNN analyst, Elie Honig. I don't know if you saw it, came out this morning. He says the charges against Trump are obscure and nearly entirely unprecedented. In fact, as you say, made up. No state prosecutor in New York or Wyoming or anywhere has ever charged federal election laws as a direct or predicate state crime against anyone for anything. None ever.
This is such a first in legal history. No state prosecutor has ever used a federal law without the federal government being involved. It's already 100% overturned, ladies and gentlemen. That's why you hit subscribe to this channel. We're almost at 250,000 subs. I think we're like 20, 30 away from 250,000 subscribers. You might be watching right now, the 250,000 subscriber on this channel. Hit subscribe.
So you're not the only liberal Democrat who believes that. I just wonder how many other folks out there who used to be against Trump are now in his favor.
I can tell you, I get calls, whispered calls from liberal Democrat friends of mine saying, you're 100% right, but I won't say it publicly because I'm so thrilled that Trump got convicted, even though the conviction was outrageous. You get a lot of liberals who believe with Elie Honig and me that this is an unjustified conviction. We're willing to say it, but they're not willing to say it. And there's dancing on the streets, and there are people who are I get these emails. They're so thrilled that we violated the Constitution in order to get Trump. I have people telling me getting Trump elected is worse than undoing the Constitution.
When you get Trump elected, we'll have a great economy and a much better foreign policy. What on earth did Trump do to these people? My God. And Trump is not the one who will silence their speech, which is what they do when they control social media algorithms. They just make things up. That's why when they're like, oh, well, you vote for a convicted felon, it's going to be overturned by the Supreme Court or the appeals court. This was simply a political stunt to get people to say, would you vote for a convicted felon? It's like Democrats, if they're indicted, actually did commit crimes. There's blatant, it's so obvious there's bribery and graft within that laptop. You wouldn't have to elevate a misdemeanor into a felony with an imaginary federal crime. You would have a laptop full of incriminating evidence. You'd have money from going into shell corporations, from very shady people across the world who emailed Hunter and eventually communicated with Joe. This isn't rocket science. And then, I mean, Clinton's servers with top secret intelligence on them, it's illegal to transfer top secret intel. This is like easy. But what Clinton did with the servers is so blatantly illegal. You can't transfer top secret intelligence onto servers. It's impossible from a cybersecurity perspective. And it's highly illegal to do. What the Bidens did is probably worse. Because Clinton likely got tacit approval from President Obama's administration, also a criminal activity there. You can't give tacit approval for your Secretary of State to break the law, but at least she got approval somehow, okay, which doesn't mean it's legal. But with the Bidens, who approved their emails, their discussions with very shady companies asking for influence, which is what the New York Post and Daily Mail talked about, and congressional Republicans. So, I mean, with Trump, they get him on something that isn't even a crime. Like, literally is not even a crime.
That's how extreme some of these people are. And, you know, it's not only this case, it's the three other cases. I go over each of them in my book, Get Trump. And every single one of them is based on conceptions that are in violation of the rule of law. This was the weakest case. This was the worst case, but it was in a very good jurisdiction.
But even Professor Dershowitz, did you imagine in your book or even a few weeks ago that the judge himself would bring so much of that prejudice? People are allowed to have their opinions. People are allowed to be inconsistent, but the judge is supposed to keep prejudice out of the courtroom. And his instructions to the jury, I've never seen anything like it. Somebody just called it a roadmap to conviction, which is essentially what it was. The judge is supposed to be neutral, if anything, on the side of the defense, because it's the prosecution that has to prove that something has been done illegally. But in this case, he was providing the jury with a road to conviction, was he not?
Yes. In fact, the day before the conviction, I wrote a column saying this was a directed verdict by the judge, that the judge was directing the jury to convict. And by the way, he didn't have to. The jury would have convicted anyway. Once the jury was selected from New York voters, 85% of whom don't want to see Trump as their president, the die was cast.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that was Alan Dershowitz, Professor Alan Dershowitz. Truffles, thank you. Mad Cow Mark, thank you. Paul Bartlett, thank you. To my super chat, thank you so very much. This is June 16, 2024. Rolling Stone. You have numerous other articles talking about the Supreme Court. It is a certainty, ladies and gentlemen. It is a certainty that the Supreme Court will overturn this blatantly unconstitutional guilty verdict. It is a certainty. The problem is we don't know when. And so we just don't know when. Could happen this week. I think, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to get a huge immunity victory, presidential immunity. When you see that in the news, hit subscribe to this channel because I will have a celebration live stream. Every day is a countdown. And I know that our election is so important to you around the world. I know that Paul and Mad Cow Mark, everyone, Truffles, everybody here, everybody around the world is looking at this and saying, okay, we want Trump. We don't want mashed potato brains. We have somebody who's one fry short of a Happy Meal. We have somebody right now in the Oval Office who, to be generous, the lights are on, but nobody's home. He's not the sharpest tool in the shed. We can go on forever. We need This is going to be a landslide victory. It's just a matter of a countdown to November 5th and beyond. Hit subscribe to this channel. Every day is a celebration on this channel, ladies and gentlemen. It'll be a huge celebration on November 5th. It's going to be a beautiful day. God bless America. God bless you. Thanks, everybody. I'll see you tomorrow for